Greetings, friends, and welcome to a sort of special edition of Tim Kirby Russia here. It's a little bit of a weird night because I just had the chance while I was on the train coming back from St. Petersburg to watch in full and especially in English the Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin interview. It was very interesting, and as one of the more somewhat, I should hope, popular political channels run by foreign guy who's in Russia, who's worked deep in the media for the last 20 years or however many years it's been. I might need to give my 2 cents to you guys in the audience. So that's what. First off, there's going to be 2 videos to this. This is video number 1, where I want to kind of get into some what I think was the sort of major message that the interview actually conveyed. And then in another video, which will be uploaded right after this one, I'm actually going to talk about what's next. Because Tucker actually filmed and did a lot of stuff while he was in Russia besides the interview. So we'll go to the what's next. How ironic. So anyways, about the Putin and Carlson interview. Now, before this, to give a little background, a lot of people were saying that there's going to be some sort of like big revelation, big reveal, big exposure of something. I thought that was maybe a little much, because that's something that sounds kind of, I don't know, fun to believe in, but basically there was no big revelation. Or if there was some sort of revelation, I didn't see it, nor did, excuse me, my telephone's making fun noises, I didn't see it, nor did, I don't think any of you. So I think some of the major messages that come across here, and the thing that was the first thing that's noticed, and even if you look the preface to sort of the interview, Tucker Carlson says, well, it was kind of like my guest was almost trying to like do a historical filibuster at first, so you might want to skip ahead a half an hour. And I thought that was kind of funny, because as you watch it, you can see that from like the very first moment, when it starts out, Putin wants to drive home the Russian version of Russian history. Okay? Because remember, maybe some of you know who I am, maybe some of you don't. But one thing that for my regular viewers should know is that I can tell you, when you learn to read and write and speak Russian, and you meet a lot of people here, Russian history is a completely different story from the rest of the world. Or let's just say the Western civilization version of history. A lot of historical figures basically sort of have 2 different instances. They have like a Western instance and then a Russian history instance. And so I think one thing that, given the chance to send a message to a Western audience, what Putin did as the Russian president, that was a very Russian thing to do, was to do a big, full historical breakdown. So it's kind of funny, because he even starts the interview by saying something like, if you'd allow me 30 seconds or a minute to go into the background of this, and he kind of said it with a smile on his face, which was weird, but that's because he knew this would take like a half an hour. And one thing that I haven't heard from any of the other analysts that I've listened to, because I like to listen to some similar people who do similar things to myself. Sometimes I get some ideas, or sometimes I learn what not to do. None of them said something that was very important. Putin's big historical breakdown, his big message that comes across in his interview, what I think is the loudest message of anything, big point number 1, is that's basically the same thing he told the Russian populace on the day when the war started. If you remember back then, as the war was starting, he gave an hour-long speech. Well, this time I guess he's talked about these topics a bit more, and he was able to sort of boil it down to 30 minutes without really losing any detail. So, yeah. So history sort of repeats itself, and I think that it's also interesting that, like, when he knew that all of Russia was listening to him, that's what he had to say. And interestingly enough, when he knew that a abnormally large amount of the Western population, and supposedly about 75% of the Ukrainian population that has access to the internet, were listening to this, he said basically exactly the same thing. That's very interesting. So when it comes to the Putin-Carlson interview, the first thing that Putin started with, which, again, another thing that was also good, but anyways, he started with the history, and one of the things that was also good about the way he delivered that, which I think was a bit better, because usually, whenever Russian leaders, again, talk with the West, we get into the whole inferiority complex, and you get in this whole thing of like, well, I guess they're our partners, even though we all know they want to destroy us, and well, we'll be polite, you don't say anything nice, and when Putin was sort of in this interview, he definitely gave off the vibe, especially when he was talking about the history of like, look, I've had enough of you Western journalists. I don't know you, Tucker guy. You seem cool, but I've been screwed over so many times. I've been disrespected so many times that I'm just going to come here and just blast away. You know, because even when Tucker Carlson tried to like sort of stop him from going through this over 1,000 years of history, he's just said something like, "Well, did we come here to do a fun show, or did we come here to like find the truth?" Or I forget what he said, or have a real conversation or a real dialogue, something like that. So he didn't seem like maybe a little agitated, but he came across. You really got the feeling of like, look, man, I've had enough of this shit. And that is exactly how the Russian population feels, and how a lot of the leadership should feel, of being absolutely burnt out on this. So, anyways, the tone was good. Now, again, this is another thing. If I were to go back in time and Putin was like, Tim, brother, I need ideas. What do I tell American public? That might not have been my choice, but then again, what can you do? It was definitely the most Russian choice. Was it the right choice when an American audience is listening to go into a half hour of hardcore history? I don't know. Again, some people even said that really maybe Putin kind of actually killed his one and only chance to speak to the West because he did like a history lesson. I don't know, but again, it's kind of like that's where all of his arguments and a lot of his reasoning comes from as to why he believes what he believes. So it's kind of one of those things is it's like if you, write some sort of, really interesting, I don't know, scientific paper, but you don't have any sources in it. You just sort of take out all the footnotes and throw them in the garbage. Well, then it just kind of seems like you're making stuff up, doesn't it? You want to kind of see where this information comes from, see where these opinions come from. So on the one hand, it was a Russian thing to do, and it relayed a lot of truth, and it also was probably the first time that anyone in the West on a massive scale was exposed to the fact that Russian history is much different than what you're, I was going to say told in school, to the very limited amount of Russian history that you're told about in school. So that was number one. And point number two, which I think if the whole history lesson is what Putin drove home, for what reason or another, Carlson really drove home this whole thing about, basically, he didn't say this, but he kept asking questions that led Putin to describe all the ways, and again, connected with the history, that this is sort of the West's fault and that they've tried to make peace. You know, he got into the whole, like, right after Yugoslavia, they tried to make up, and then Yeltsin just got demonized. That in a lot of ways, the collapse of the USSR was actually to make friends with the West for certain people who are involved in it. Also, an interesting thing, Putin just told the West that the Soviet Union was soft collapsed from the inside. That's not what's definitely not what is in your history textbooks in America. What did he get into? He got into the whole thing, a lot of things related to the Maidan and even the 2008 revolution and some of the Ukrainian elections and all this and all of these moments in history. The reset button, I think, kind of got in there. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. But there are a lot of moments in history where he could have basically there could have been some sort of rapprochement. There could have been he even mentioned to the public the whole thing about how Russia actually asked to join NATO at some point, But ultimately, Carlson kept going back to this thing about, well, why don't you try to make peace? Why don't you try to make peace? And then Putin's like, well, look at all these times we tried to make peace and you wouldn't let us. And now Zelensky actually forbid anyone to try to negotiate with the Russians. So now any sort of negotiation is forbidden, and you're asking me, why don't I try to negotiate a solution? And of course, he also got into, well, you're asking me to negotiate a solution, but I thought we had a solution negotiated in Turkey, like that would have averted all this war and all the people who have died wouldn't have died. So that was more Carlson kept, for whatever reason, bringing up various ways of asking him, well, why don't you try to make peace? Or why don't you try to, make an agreement? And Putin's answer, again, in various different flavors was, I would, but that's not possible because you guys won't let me. And I think that that's kind of the other real major point of this that I think is the take home. I've seen a couple really dumb takes on this interview where people are getting into the real nitty gritty, and especially the thing which is one of my least favorite things that people do is when they talk about what people haven't said. You know, because Putin didn't say this or didn't say that, or because Carlson didn't say this or didn't say that, that means that it's all part of some grand evil conspiracy. And guys, I'll tell you what, when you interview a world leader, you only have so much time. Although the interview made it seem like they had all the time in the world. It kind of ran about 2 hours. I doubt that they had that much more than that. Probably it was set to a 3-hour maximum or 2.5-hour maximum. But getting to this whole thing of like, well, they didn't talk about this, that, or the other, and that means it's part of some sort of global conspiracy, is just silly. But anyways, maybe the main thing that they didn't talk about, again, I'm going to be a little bit of a hypocrite here, but then again, I'm not scolding them for not talking about it. One of the main things they didn't talk about is Putin really dodged any issues related to internal U.S. affairs, but there was nothing of the sort of like conservative brothers unite that, you know, the Russian masses and especially Republican voting American masses are nothing of the sort. I thought myself that there'd be a little bit of that. Zero. He really kept this to so like the people being mentioned is like the Ukrainian side, the Russian side, historical figures, and then like the Western establishment, and no one but them. So yeah, very interesting that no populism, no nothing. And in fact, I actually do think that judging by the way this interview went, that I think it truly was legit that Putin wasn't given the questions in advance, because it is kind of weird. It is kind of like the thing where if you're doing a podcast, I'll tell you as someone who's had a lot of interviews, sometimes you interview someone and they're very much a media person. They hear your question and they give an answer sort of in like a 30 to a second to a minute package, or whatever their size is, maybe 5 minutes. But they're very good at sort of organizing their thoughts and giving you the sort of answer that would look nice if it was written down, or will be great for a YouTube video. And then sometimes you interview someone and really they're just like, okay, so what is your the source of your inspiration? No, I don't know. I just kind of like to go out and sometimes look outside. Next question. Some people, they don't give you anything to work with. They're very short. And then the worst case scenario is you get some people where you'll bring them on, and unless they're a very good orator, if you're a good orator, if you're good at speaking, you can kind of talk about anything. Maybe I'm case in point. But if you get someone on who you'll ask them a real short question and they'll just start dropping the bomb, like Putin in the first 30 minutes of the interview, that's real rough. And we saw that. It was very much like it didn't have that flavor of being something that was rehearsed or practiced, and so I think it felt very original. But anyways, we're going to get on to video number 2 here real soon. I just wanted to say that overall, I think the two major points to take away from this, and remember, I'm a big fan of boiling things down to their sort of essence. And what was the essence of this? It was, while the world was watching, Vladimir Putin was asked questions. Again, the first question he was asked, he kind of ignored, and what did he come? He came to drop the bomb on Russian history, to come out and give a 30-minute spiel about the realities of the history and the historical justifications for what's happening and the way the world looks through Russian eyes. So he came out to do that. And then through the line of questioning, for whatever reason, Tucker-Carlson kept pushing him back towards this position where he had to say, look, here's an example of the time we reached out to you guys to make peace. Here's another example, and another example, and another example, and another example. And ultimately, it got to this sort of, point where it's like, Zelensky forbid any negotiations, and we had a negotiated settlement in Turkey that the then Kiev's diplomats threw into the garbage can. So, Tim Kirby Russia here. I'm going to sign out. We're going to be continuing on with another video where we're going to talk about what's going to happen after all of this.